Last October, the Secretariat of the Advisory Committee on the Framework Convention for the Protection of National Minorities issued a fact sheet on the challenges faced by women and girls belonging to national minorities. This represents yet another step in underpinning gender mainstreaming in the work of the Advisory Committee. This is the most clearly reflected in the Gender Equality Checklist and the role of the Gender Equality Rapporteur. My name is Ljubica Djordjević, and in this episode on Conversation with Experts, I have the privilege of speaking with Professor Judith Wyttenbach, an advisory committee member in respect of Switzerland since summer 2024 and the current Gender and Equality Rapporteur. Judith is also professor of constitutional and international law at the University of Bern, Switzerland. Judith, thank you very much for your time and for your willingness to shed light on the gender mainstreaming in the work of the advisory committee and dialogue mechanism with state parties. So to start off, could you tell us a bit about your role as Gender Equality Rapporteur and how gender mainstreaming fits into overall work of the advisory committee? And also a few lines about, or for a few words about the gender equality checklist. So your role and just to start off about gender issues in the work of the advisory committee. And once again, thank you very much for your time, and I look forward to this discussion.
Thank you very much, Ljubica, for this invitation. And I'm very delighted to have the opportunity to have this interview with you today. So you asked many questions to start, so I will sort them.
Mm-hmm.
And so maybe first, as for my role as a gender equality rapporteur.
Mm-hmm.
So in French, we would say rapporteuse,
Okay.
as I'm a woman, but I think in English it's rapporteur. So the position of gender equality rapporteur was introduced into the advisory committee's rules of procedure in 2020. And the idea of this gender equality rapporteur is to ensure that the gender perspective is integrated throughout the work of the advisory committee. And so this represents a strong institutional commitment, in my opinion, to systematically address gender issues. So the tasks of the gender equality rapporteurs include or may include sharing the latest information and studies with the other committee members, encouraging internal training, general discussions for awareness raising and capacity building, introducing gender aspects into discussions of draft opinions. That's a very important issues. Making suggestions for additions to the gender equality checklist. We are going to talk about this checklist later on, and try to develop common approaches. But I would like to emphasize that the Bureau, the Secretariat of the committee, actually performs very important tasks also in the area of gender equality and mainstreaming. And in our case, that would be Elise Kornu, the head of the Bureau, and Kinga Jensen-Magyar of the Directorate of Equal Rights and Dignity, the Council of Europe. And then the scientific staff of the Bureau also takes into account gender issues while ensuring the very important background work of the committee, drafting with the working groups the opinions, for example. So this is really very important for gender mainstreaming. And so the Bureau also prepared the recent fact sheet on minority women.
And if I may just interrupt you, sorry. Is it the only rapporteur among the advisory committee, or do you have some other issues, or is the gender rapporteur the only rapporteur?
So every committee functions a bit differently, but this is also stemming from general documents of the Council of Europe, this idea to have a gender rapporteur. So we are not the only committee. And
no, but I think Sorry, I mean rapporteur for some other issues within the advisory committee.
Oh, okay, I
Yeah,
understand.
yeah.
No, no, we
Uh,
don't have that.
so
No.
this is a unique,
Yeah.
let's say,
It's
rapporteur of the
it's
advice. Uh-huh.
absolutely, it's
Mhm.
a unique position,
Mhm.
I would say. And that brings me to the next question you asked, how it fits into the overall work of the
Mhm.
advisory committee, this gender mainstreaming aspects. And I would say it fits very well. And it's absolutely necessary, as it is not possible to talk about minority rights without taking the perspective of multiple and intersectional aspects. So,
Mhm.
because minority groups, as you of course know, minority groups and interests of individuals are not homogeneous. So,
Yeah.
persons affiliated with a minority, they may share some common interest, but they are also individuals with individual experiences, needs, vulnerabilities, depending on age, gender, economic status, and gender equality is one very aspect in guaranteeing an inclusive approach to minority rights.
Yeah, this is
And
something what is really visible in the advisory opinions in recent cycles. This emphasis of not treating minorities as homogeneous entities, but to also deal with diversity within minorities and taking into consideration different interests and positions of specific social groups, let's say, within national minorities. So
yes,
not to put them all in one box, let's say.
mhm.
Mhm.
Yes, one can see this clearly that there has been an increase in the last 10 years, clearly. And so the advisory committee has reinforced gender mainstreaming in several ways. And one aspect is exactly what you mentioned, is to systematic monitoring and documentation of gender analysis of its work, so of the work of the advisory committee and of states' progress in this
Mhm.
respect. So this allows to track progress in applying a gender perspective and holding states accountable over time.
Mhm.
So we have these two documents, gender analysis. One is from 2017 to 2020, and the other one is from 21 to 24.
And they are public, sorry,
Yes,
they can be found on
yeah, they
the
can be found.
advisory
Yeah,
committee webpage.
exactly.
Mhm.
And then secondly, last summer, the committee has decided as a new working method that each country-specific working group denominates one person as a gender delegate.
Mhm.
Now, those country-specific working groups, they are very important. They normally consist of 3 committee members.
Mhm.
Together with the Secretariat, they prepare the monitoring visits, for instance, the questions to the government, the selection of interlocutors to meet and institutions to meet, and then they draft the opinion to be discussed in the plenary. So the idea is that one of the 3 persons in the working groups to each specific country is a gender delegate
Mhm.
to enable gender mainstreaming from the very beginning of the monitoring cycle. So
Mhm.
this person is the idea, can advocate for example, for more effective or sensitive or confidence-based dialogue with stakeholders, including women and girls belonging to national minorities.
Mhm.
But I have to say, so as we only introduced this new feature recently, we'll first have to see how it proves itself to be
Mhm.
helpful. And with all new instruments, you first have to practice a little to
Yeah.
learn how to use it best. And I guess there will be a kind of evaluation after 2 years or something to decide, is that a good instrument or
Mhm.
not.
Mhm.
So that is the second thing. And
Mhm.
the third thing is this new fact sheet
Mhm.
on challenges faced by women and girls belonging to national minorities that has been prepared by the Secretariat in
Second
October
October.
2025.
Yes. Yes. And what about this checklist? So gender equality checklist, how do you use it? And so it's not public, as I couldn't find it, but is it really a checklist where you have like click, so women represented or underrepresented and so on? How does it work and how it impacts your assessment of situation in
Yeah,
each
so
state
I
party?
would say this is probably the most important gender mainstreaming instrument the committee has.
Mm-hmm.
So it is a practical tool for the work of the advisory committee, and it's also a working tool. That means it has to be updated regularly.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of a checklist in progress, let's say. And it helps the committee to adopt a gender-specific perspective in its work when analyzing the state reports, when preparing monitoring visits, when drafting questions for the governments, when selecting individuals, organizations to be met, drafting questions for interlocutors, and using a gender-neutral inclusive language. And for
Mm-hmm.
instance, the checklist has targeted questions for monitoring process and the monitoring cycle. And this means article by article. So you
Mm-hmm.
say, is it really a checklist? And I say, yes, it is. But of
Mm-hmm.
course, you work with it in an adaptable way.
Yeah.
Not
Mm-hmm.
always
Mm-hmm.
is you find the things you need there, but it gives you a strong idea of what you can work with. So it wants to ensure that you, as a committee member, as a working group, you do not overlook gender issues
Mm.
and that you have a consistent methodology across different countries that you try to
Yeah,
apply. And I make an example. So Article 15 of the Convention speaks about participation.
exactly.
Article 15 explicitly asks for effective
Mm.
participation in
Mm.
cultural, social, economic life, and public affairs. And the gender equality checklist then specifies questions with respect to gender issues. For instance, by asking, and I quote, are women proportionally represented in leading positions of national minority associations and political parties?
Mm.
If not, are respective policy measures in place to increase the presence of women in executive positions and decision-making processes at different levels? And of course, there are many other questions. And from a holistic perspective, it is very important that this checklist is not treated as a, let's say, a separate document,
Mhm.
but is integrated in the general checklists the committee has.
Mhm.
So that this perspective, this gender lens, is always applied.
Mm. Mhm. Mhm. Yeah.
Not in the sense, okay, and now for the women,
Mhm. Uh-huh.
but
Yeah.
you know,
Mm.
in including it into the thinking.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
that's what I can
Yeah.
say about the gender.
Yeah. And speaking about the topics which are reflected in the fact sheet, so it's about participation in public life, which is a very important issue, access to socioeconomic life, including education, and unfortunately continued issue of violence. So two questions to you from me is when we look at a minority protection through a gender lens, where do you see the gender relation issues coming the most strongly and how the advisory committee has addressed these main challenges? So what are the gender specific issues, if we can say them? So
Mhm.
where do you find applicability of checklists and where the gender comes most prominent?
Mhm. So firstly, my impression is that many problems can be traced back to the underlying structural disadvantages of women and girls. So all
Mhm.
those sectoral problems you mentioned, in my opinion, they go back to these underlying structural disadvantages. And there, one factor is gender stereotyping, but also intersectional stereotyping about
Mhm.
gender and minority identity on the part of the state and society. And another main factor in my opinion, is inequality with respect to political participation.
Mm-hmm.
And the committee, in my opinion, has a very good and comprehensive understanding of structural barriers to minority rights, not only with respect to gender issues, but in general. Rather than treating symptoms, the committee addresses those underlying social and economic drivers of
Mm-hmm.
disadvantage and discrimination, taking into account poverty, marginalization, and lack of opportunities as contributing factors. So this is one aspect. The other is intersectionality.
Mm-hmm.
The committee understands that minority women cannot be adequately protected through either a normal general gender equality policy, which may ignore minority specific issues, or a general minority rights policy, which may overlook gender discrimination.
Mm-hmm.
So the intersectional lens is absolutely necessary to identify how factors work together to create multiple or unique forms of marginalization and discrimination for women and girls. And finally, the third thing, the committee lays emphasis on evidence-based, community-centered approach. So regularly recommends to state parties to develop policy in close cooperation with persons belonging to the communities concerned and following an evidence-based approach. And this general participatory methodology recognizes minority women as experts in their own field with their own experiences rather than passive subjects of policy. So those are the factors I would say are on, let's say, the baseline of discrimination, but also the factors contributing to overcome.
Mm-hmm. So my sense is that it's not the advisory committee says do so and so, but
No.
it's more a recommendation like consult and including minority women, so stakeholders, make them stakeholders and find the best appropriate solution for the issue. So
Exactly. Develop with them together a
mm,
policy needed.
so like a target
No.
approach. And how do state parties react on this to recommendation, and whether do you observe that over time and monitoring cycle the awareness among state parties and authorities has risen, that they are more sensitive to gender issues, or it's just like, oh, again, something from advisory committee?
Yeah. So, of course, I cannot comment on specific countries here.
Of
That's
course.
clear. And I would say the commitment of states depends a lot on how strongly they are committed to a gender equality strategy in general,
Mm-hmm.
and how robust their non-discrimination and legal framework and institutions are in this field. But however, for me, it's clear and certain, and you can also see it from state reports, that the advisory committee's greater focus on gender perspectives means that countries will also have to address this issue more intensely, and they also do. So they react to the questions of the committee. And that's also the idea. I mean, the gender lens of the committee should encourage states to prepare more thoroughly on gender issues and to elevate gender equality in national policy around minority rights. So, in my opinion, this clearly has an effect. Even the fact that the states have to engage in ideas how they could deal with those challenges they face.
And another point is how minorities, minority leaders also react, because sometimes from outside the impression is that minority representatives, when you meet them, is usually white older men, and I don't want to be somehow uh, politically incorrect, but there is a lot of criticism also for minority representation, that it tends to be men driven, and that separate or selectively gender balance in terms where are more important issues, then you see when then you meet all men, and when it's culture and some kind of social work, then you meet minority women. So and then the question is whether minority groups themselves also how they respond to this gender sensitivity, and also provide space and forum for women also to represent minorities, not only in this traditional, let's say, singing, dancing, cooking areas, but also in political participation or empowerment, local business, or and so on and so forth.
It's also a very important aspect, and this goes into the chapter of participation, because participation doesn't just mean to participate in state structures or state institutions, but also in minority bodies representing minorities, and that there it is necessary to again and again point out that underrepresentation has to be addressed, and the committee calls there for legislative frameworks with effective mechanisms ensuring adequate representation in all bodies on all state levels, but also male-dominated decision-making structures within minorities should not be ignored, but questions. And on working visits, monitoring visits in member states, it is important that the committee asks also to see women organization and asks questions about the representation of women or girls, if we talk about the youth organizations. Um, how the representation could be increased, and what the plans are of the minority to increase the representation of women. So, but I think you're right. This can be a challenge, but I also have to say that there we sometimes have a bit of a stereotype, because it's not true for all minorities, because minority women very frequently demonstrate exceptional commitment to community organizing and non-governmental organizations and state advisory bodies. And so that is also clear. And this engagement is extremely important to advance women's and girls' rights in general, and minority women and girls' rights in particular.
Mm.
So
Yes, so we can also observe this increase of women activism also within minorities over the last monitoring cycles, and also in practice, we who work with minorities also see this, that they are more active, although sometimes really reserved to some. But I think this will improve also, hopefully. Do you see this tendency now? The focus is here on gender in this talk, but do you see this tendency of the advisory committee to maybe follow this approach with gender with some other subgroups? I also observed in opinions, lastly, also mentioning youth or minorities living in rural areas. And so do you see their diversification of approach of advisory committee going beyond gender?
I have the impression that yes, also when I read older opinions and reports and recommendations, again and again, there is also the focus on youth, children and youth, persons living in remote areas, not having enough access to infrastructure and services, old people, old people's needs, and Roma communities. Roma communities face in some countries particular challenges of social and economic exclusion. And so, yes, I would say you are right. It's gender is one aspect, but of course, if you take everyone along, if you want to take everyone along, it's much more than gender.
Mm.
It's being aware of individual vulnerabilities, individual needs, and to see the individuals within their community. I mean, they may share common needs, common interests with their group or affiliated group, but of course, they have their particular vulnerabilities, interests, challenges in everyday life. So it's very important
Mm.
to not overlook this.
Yeah. And it's also in the practice of advisory committee, when delegation comes for state visit, it's not only that you visit the capital city, but you also go into the areas where minority live and try to contact as many as groups within minorities. So to also see in the context in which they live and not just the picture given in the capital.
Yes, that's very
Mm.
important. Not only to be in the capital and meet interlocutors there in a conference room,
Mm.
but also to go in those areas where traditionally minorities live, and even to go and go to their neighborhoods and visit settlements, for instance. Yes.
Mm. Yeah. Uh, I think these all the questions I had on the list have been answered. Is there anything for the end? Is there anything you would like to add or to emphasize from your
Yeah.
work and experience?
Yes, there is one thing.
Hmm.
It's a bit related to what we spoke about when we talked about minority organizations, activists. I think their work is very important also for the work of the committee because those organizations, women's, girls' organizations, they can bring by documentation and data. They can bring evidence building. They can conduct community-based surveys. They can hand in research documentation. They can collect testimonies and document incidents of violence, for instance. So, in my opinion, it's very important that they engage in that dialogue with the committee. And they also have this possibility, of course. So that is something
Yeah.
it was important to add.
Yeah, I think also on the website of the advisory committee there is a non-governmental
Mhm.
organization, and there is the role of civil society also through providing shadow reports, or how is it now called?
Yeah.
So in getting involved into the monitoring dialogue, and so that's really can through this participation in monitoring process can also be very valuable as a partner in dialogue, this dialogue mechanism. So
Mhm.
it's really rightly pointed out. Good. That was a very, very inspiring conversation to me. What we can say to, to our audience that the things you mentioned, except for the checklist, are available on the advisory committee webpage, so people could find both the fact sheet but also the documents you mentioned. So I invite people to check regularly the advisory committee website, also for the gender issues. We also covered this in the work of the European Center for Minority Issues. So I kindly invite all the people watching us to take a look at our webpage as well, and our social media channels. And as I mentioned it last time, this is our small contribution to strengthening multilateral engagement and multilateral efforts to support minorities and to support diversity in Europe, which we consider is a big asset because minority matters, as we say it here at the ECMI. So thank you very much for this conversation, and all the best also with gender mainstreaming in minority protection.
Thank you very much for this interview.
Yeah. Have a nice day.
Yes, you too. Bye bye.
Bye.